Hello. I'm Rishit, and today we'll be talking about serverless magic for ML orchestration using Kubeflow. So, a lot of what we'll be talking about today will be focused around Kubeflow pipelines and how can you run Kubeflow pipelines in a serverless manner. Uh, yeah, and we'll also show some demos regarding it. So, hello, I'm Rishit, and I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Toronto, and right now I'm also working on the machine learning team on the Finch mission at SpaceX. Uh, we are due to launch on 2024. Uh, that's what I've been up to. Shivay, would you like to talk about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to the entire Kubeflow and Electro team for organizing the Kubeflow. I'm Shivay. I graduated from undergrad degree in computer science back in 2020. And ever since then, I've been mainly working as a software engineer. I've been primarily very active in the CNCF landscape and specifically the WASMEDS project and WebAssembly and on the AI side as well with Kubeflow and with TensorFlow.js. So yeah, I'm really excited to be presenting today's talk about Kubeflow pipelines and how you can integrate them with the Vertex AI pipelines as well. So really looking forward to be sharing about our plan today. Over to you, Rishit.
Sure. So a quick walkthrough through what we'll be talking about today. So we'll start out with a very quick introduction to pipelines. We want to then highlight some of the challenges we have seen, and these might not be like entirely new challenges, as in uh, these might not be unsolved challenges, but some of the challenges we have faced, which should give a great motivation for Vertex AI pipelines and Kubeflow, why you should listen to this talk in the first place, or even incorporate some of the things if you like them. So that is what we'll be doing. Then we'll see how you can do this. And we'll also talk about Vertex ML metadata, which is a metadata store for Kubeflow pipelines when you run them with Vertex AI pipelines. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And Shiva, would you like to get it started?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of recapping for those folks who might not be aware of what exactly is a Kubeflow pipeline. So first we'll just describe what are pipelines, what are the major components of a pipeline, and then how what are some of the challenges when it comes to actually implementing and using these pipelines. So essentially, pipeline is kind of like a description of a machine learning workflow, which and this machine learning workflow could be an end-to-end system where you start by taking some input data and you clean up your data and do some feature engineering on top of your data, and then finally you are going ahead and taking that input data and running it inside of a machine learning model to train that model, and finally you are getting your results, right? So that's the end-to-end machine learning workflow. So when we talk about scaling these machine learning workflows and deploying them, that's where these pipelines come into picture, which provide you the end-to-end deployable and scalable machine learning workflows. And these are primarily focused on Docker containers. So your different steps of your machine learning workflows will be represented as either individual Docker images or stored images. So we can probably come to the next part, which is the component. So just imagine if we talk about an entire pipeline which has the multiple steps, right? With any machine learning workflow, it will have multiple steps. So your component is kind of like the smallest building block, which essentially represents your one particular step inside of this entire machine learning workflow. So you could define separate components for defining your input data and how you're capturing your input data and whatever transformations you're making into it. You could have your components for your actual machine learning inference and training your machine learning model. So you'll define specific components for each of these steps that are involved inside of your machine learning workflow. We can move to the next one. And then the graph is essentially a representation of the entire machine learning workflow with the help of this UI platform. This is provided out of the box by the Kubeflow Pipelines UI. So you can see a runtime execution and actually just go ahead and check what are each and every step of your machine learning pipeline. Because of course, if you have a more complex workflow, you might have multiple components defined. And if you want to see how each one of them is interconnected with each other, this provides you a very simple way of actually being able to visualize it. And primarily what we want is to have a focus on being able to have each of these components as independent units. And of course, what we can do is that if there is a requirement for dependencies, let's say you have done some data transformation on one of your component, you can use that as input for your component where you have defined your machine learning model, right? Where you're training your model. So ideally, we want each of these components to be standalone images. And that's what, we'll move to the next slide to talk about that. And there are two different ways that we can basically do this. Either we can have a self-contained, or we can also have a container image through which we are able to, so you can think of it in this way. As you define each and every component, you could have a specific image that you define for each of these components. So you could have an image just for your component for training the data, and a separate image for your model input. And now, before we jump into the challenges, Rishit, if you would want to probably add something more towards pipelines in general, and if you would want to probably just share a few of the challenges that we face with, the general Kubeflow pipelines.
Yeah, sure. So, so some of the challenges I particularly wanted to highlight among others is so one of the things we want is each of our components should be independent of each other. So we have individual pipeline steps, and uh, and containerization does a lot of this for you. Uh, you want to make a container image for each of your components, and the pipelines SDK does do a great job at it. So that is one of the challenges, but the pipelines SDK already does a great job at it. You can have a function, give it a base image, create a container out of it very easily with the pipelines SDK. So this challenge is no longer there with the Kubeflow pipelines SDK. But another challenge which I'd like to highlight among the two main things I've faced is setting up infrastructure for your experiments. Not all your experiments, not all your pipelines need the same kind of infrastructure. Not every pipeline needs a GPU, not every pipeline needs a CPU, and not do all of the need the same amount of CPUs, GPUs, or memory that you're using. So setting up infrastructure is another big challenge, and which is why we particularly want to bring in the idea of serverless pipelines into place. And Vertex AI pipelines does a great job at this. Uh, so, so essentially, what you're trying to solve is not having to go through setting up infrastructure for each of your pipeline runs, and have Vertex AI do that right out of the box for you, which is also what you should have expected when you saw the title serverless. Uh, yeah, this is what we'll be talking about, and if you just listen to what we talked about pipelines and how they work together, what Shivay just said about pipelines and how they work together. Uh, uh, Setting up infrastructure is one of the problems we want to tackle with this talk. So, having said that, we now want to talk about Vertex AI pipelines, and I said that does a great job at it. So, how does it do that, and how does it work? So, first off, you already expected this. Vertex AI pipelines allows you to serverless run your pipelines. What the serverless runs for your pipeline means is essentially just that you don't have to worry about hardware provisioning for your machine learning experiments. Uh, any kind of provisioning or scaling up for the infrastructure you need to run your pipeline, even hardware accelerators or other type of hardware provisioning too, not necessarily GPU or a TPU or something else, but you can also have your hardware provisioned for your machine learning experiments very easily. So that is one of the things Vertex AI pipelines has. And another thing you can do with running your pipelines in this manner is also get the benefits of metadata lineage. So this is something I've actually been using quite a lot myself. And uh, with metadata lineage, what we essentially want to do is create a DAG for what metadata goes where. Essentially, create a DAG to answer the question what metadata goes where. Uh, so let's say one of your components gives you an artifact or an output which you probably transform and use in some other component. How does that artifact go to the other component, or which all other components does that artifact go to? Is what I simply call metadata lineage. So that is another really interesting thing and pretty useful too, of course, as you might have made out. Uh, so that is another pretty useful thing I can do with Kubeflow pipelines, running them with Vertex AI pipelines. So yeah, those are some of the main reasons we talk about Vertex AI pipelines and why it solves uh, why it solves one of the challenges we were particularly excited about. So let's talk about the idea. How do you use Kubeflow pipelines and Vertex AI pipelines together? So yes, so so all of you have you. I guess a lot of you might have used the Kubeflow DSL package and have had a nice experience with it. I can't see your faces, but I would expect a few nods. So I've had particularly nice experiences with it. I would expect a few more nods. So I'd expect some nods from the audience. But quickly, this allows you to create container images from your components. Uh, simply have a base image, your function. This is a simple way to create a component from your function. You can do this, or you can also, or you have a lot of flexibility for creating components. You might want to use some other image, add some more things to the image, and so on. You can do all sorts of that stuff. You have flexibility doing that. So, the Kubeflow DSL package does a great job at allowing you to define pipelines, uh, or allowing you to create the components and then create a graph for the components. So the Kubeflow DSL package already does a great job at this. And another thing you can do with Vertex AI is also extend with pre-built components. So if you're using Vertex AI pipelines to run your Kubeflow pipelines, you can also extend the functionality of Kubeflow pipelines. So this particular example is a serving example. So we are essentially setting up a model server in the pipeline, which is also pretty nice. That you can do it simply with some steps. So having talked about that, we already know we have already used the Kubeflow DSL package, and that's a great way to write your pipeline. So I don't want to move away from that. So the idea with Vertex AI pipelines is you still write your pipelines with the Kubeflow DSL package. So before we go to the next step, which is compile your pipelines, let me go slide back. I'll stop sharing and then I'll reshare my screen. Uh, so I can also show a demo. I mean, so here we have. Okay, yeah. Let's start sharing my screen now. Great. So what I have here is I'll give you a quick overview of what my demo looks like, or what my demo environment is. So I'm using Sivo. I mean, you can use anything. This is just because Kubeflow runs effortlessly on Sivo. Uh, so which is why I'm using a Sivo Kubernetes cluster. But I mean, feel free to use anything, of course. Uh, what I can simply do is uh, click on Kubeflow. So I actually contributed this extension to Sivo, and this allows you to quickly get started with Kubeflow and installs all of the Kubeflow components. But I will not talk about this. I just wanted to give a background of the give a background of what environment I'm using for this demo. So that's the environment I'm using for this demo. I'll go to Kubeflow Summit. I already have a pre-built Kubernetes cluster, and what I'll do is maybe Shivay can give a quick overview of some of the example pipelines we have built.
Yeah.
So, sure.
Yeah, so basically what we did was that after having installed Kubernetes on this Kubernetes cluster, we also spun up the Kubernetes notebooks and specifically the UI dashboard for that. So as you can see, this is our hosted Jupyter Lab file. And here we have basically created two sample pipelines that will be giving you a demonstration for today when we basically compile them, generate the output JSON format, and then use that instead of our Vertex AI pipeline for the serverless inference, right? So the first pipeline is a very simple example, which is the Hello World pipeline from from the Kubeflow website. So we'll be running this pipeline, and then we have another pipeline that we'll just quickly walk through. So the other pipeline is also a relatively simple pipeline, straightforward pipeline where we take basically data from Google BigQuery. We input that data and store it into our data frame, and then we run some transformations on top of it. So we basically have created one component, one Kubeflow pipelines component for being able to fetch our BigQuery data and then being able to convert it into the data frame. And we have a separate component where we are basically doing the machine learning inference, where we are going basically installing the sklearn package, and we are using a decision tree classifier to run it over the data that we fetch from our BigQuery dataset. Of course, in this case, I mean, you could use any dataset that you want, but it's a very simple, straightforward, use case. So what you'll see is that when you see the visualization, you'll see two separate components as well. And if you probably can scroll down, you can see that over here we have defined our main pipeline. And in the cell number, that's in the cell number 18, where we have actually defined our our Kubeflow pipeline, which uses both of our components. And the next section that you see is the cell 20, and that's where we are basically compiling our pipeline, and we generate the pipeline 2.json, and this is what we'll be basically using with our Vertex AI. Over to you, Rishit. And one thing that you'll also see is that in the next cell, which I've basically commented, we specifically didn't run the pipeline. So with Kubeflow, you can directly run by using the client.create run from pipeline function. We dedicatedly did not do this to demonstrate how, in case you want to provision infrastructure, how you can do that serverlessly with the help of the Vertex AI. So we'll now head over to the Vertex AI platform to share how we utilize that. So over to you, Rishit. I think you're on mute.
Oh, yes, I was. Yes, so now we have built our pipeline using the Kubeflow DSL package. Now we have compiled our pipeline to a .json file. In our case, it's called pipeline2.json because there was a pipeline 1.json. There were two pipelines. So that's what we have done. And next up, what we'll do is we want to be able to run it with Vertex AI pipelines. And so what you can use is, so you can also make use of Google Cloud Pipeline components to create individual workflow steps. We actually showed a small code snippet of that earlier. And you can also run using the Python client. So yeah, you can also, I'll also show an example of that. So this is just a small code snippet. I'll show it up. So let's again go back to my notebook, my Kubeflow notebooks. And you can also submit this job using the Python SDK. But something I want to show is how you can create a run. So let's just go to Vertex. Actually, I'll create a separate tab because here's also something else I want to show in the later part of the demo. So let's go to Vertex AI, and yes, I have selected the right project. And then I go to pipelines, and I essentially have two pipeline runs here. So you can take the compiled pipeline and just run it with Vertex AI pipelines. What you need is a home for the a root path for the pipeline, which is actually the bucket I have called Kubeflow Summit. So the Kubeflow Summit is actually the root for my pipeline here, where my pipeline will be running. So that's what I've run. This is my simple pipeline, and this is just a very simple pipeline which prints out hello world, nothing interesting here. So this is my second pipeline, and what I essentially did was I took the compiled pipeline and actually let's run it once again. So let me go to notebooks, connect to this notebook. I'm connecting to this notebook because I already have my compiled pipeline here. So I can easily schedule a run using the compiled pipeline. So here it is. I have my pipeline2.json. Then I can, so you can also use the SDK to do the exact same thing. I also have code written for it, but but just to show you how it works, setting home paths and all of that from here, um, which is why I'm using this. We'll call this example because I can't think of better names. And I have a service account which I created for this demo. Uh, and I also will enter the root path for it, which is actually the bucket I had created earlier. I have the BigQuery table. I have the BigQuery table field. So this is one of the inputs for my. So this is one of the inputs for my pipelines, and I already have a BigQuery dataset too. It's essentially a simple CSV dataset, so and nothing very fancy. So let's put in my BigQuery dataset as well. This is one of the publicly available BigQuery datasets out there, and now that I've done this, I can just submit the pipeline run. Again, there are multiple ways to submit to the pipeline run, but I just wanted to go through all the steps here. Uh, so our pipeline is running. It will look exactly like the one which ran before. So let's just go through this one while the pipeline is running. So we have two components as expected. And I can also see the artifacts generated by all of these components, the jobs generated, and the hardware provisioning also happened automatically. For this particular example, there wasn't a need for any specialized TPUs or so to say. But for your own examples, you can easily swap out what we did with some other hardware accelerators, probably your own hardware accelerator you have. So that's one of the things you can do with pipelines very easily. And now you have already submitted a run for the pipeline. Something else I wanted to talk about was the Vertex ML metadata and metadata lineage, which I also said was one of the things I had been pretty useful for me, and one of the problems I wanted to solve. So let's talk about that. And first, and now what I want to do is see all the artifacts created by my pipeline. In my case, these are just three artifacts, in fact. So and now when I just click view lineage, what I can see is how is this artifact being used? What all other components is it being used for? So that is one of the things I can see over here, and I can of course see the artifact itself. So this is something pretty useful, and model lineage is something I've been using quite a lot. So another thing you get out of the box with Vertex AI pipelines. And we also have two more metrics here, which is when we train the small model we have, what was the accuracy it got and so on. this is a very small data set, so we get dream numbers. uh, So that's about Vertex AI, and let's go to pipelines. The pipeline we submitted should have run by now. Oh, it should take 30 or so more seconds. But that's about pipelines, and it was able to run the first component successfully. So it's just getting onto the second component. But you understand the idea. So with that, we come to the end of our talk. Uh, and If you have any questions, we would love to take those right now. If not, I also put in that Twitter handles for me and Shivay. You can always reach out to us or talk to us after the talk.
Yeah, we'll be more than happy to take up any questions now.
Any questions for anyone in the room? I don't believe there's any questions. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for hearing.